So good morning. Everybody, please take your seat that we can start with the Ernst Lehnhardt Memorial Session. First of all, I want to express my deep thanks to Dr. Monika Lehnhardt-Goriany, who basically did take the initiative, and I think more than a year ago we spoke about the possibility to put this session into the program and also commemorating the groundbreaking work that had been done by Professor Ernst Lehnhardt, my so to say predecessor, who did all this where we are standing on. And his wife, Monika, she was at his side, and he basically did also support all these activities just from the company side. Now, just at that time, when it started, 1988, there was basically only very little there, and it was, of course, of utmost importance to have a device which is reliable, which had already been used in many patients, in adult patients, and where there was a proven track record of functionality and also of reliability. And so this, let's say, team did work together and did push the cochlear implant for children in Europe, and I think also worldwide, and Europe was really in the forefront of doing it. So my task is now just to say something about the Hanover Cochlear Implant Program before I hand over to Monika for then leading through the session. We see with some of the pioneers at the early days who really then did take the message. Thank you. So the Hanover CI program, I just want to say there are three pioneers. Besides Professor Lehnhardt, it was Rolf-Dieter Badtmer, the engineer, who basically did also write one of the first fitting programs for the nucleus system, and Bodo Bertram, who was a genius in his work with children. So they three together said we can do something in children, and we want to dare it. Now, the first thing that was done, of course, was an adult patient. You see here the first CI patient at MHH, Inge Krenz, in the year 1984, and you see Professor Badtmer here basically doing some of the fitting at that time. And then the first child then, we heard yesterday about Tobias Fischer, and you see here how it was done. It was an engineer together with the therapist, basically to make it the best way how to bring the implant to the child. And then, of course, we had 2022, they have 11,000 patients coming out of it. Among them, around 4,500 children we have implanted in Hanover. I would have showed you yesterday, it started in 1984. We were able to really push it forward with all this other infrastructure you need to make it a success. And I especially want to mention the Children's Implant Center, which was a keystone at that time, because at that time there was basically no institution that was able to provide the necessary, I would say, ecosystem for the rehabilitation of children. And it was done in the hospital, as you saw, for the first patients, or children, but this is not adequate. And especially you need some time, you need, let's say, a few days, a week, until the first fitting has been done, and there is a ground that then the parents can basically at home and then work further with the child. Although this cochlear implant center indeed was a major thing, I have one mistake here on my slide. It was opened in 1990, not in 92, sorry for this. But later on then it moved to another building, which then was much larger and still is used today. And this Children's Implant Center is a role model that has been copied worldwide for this purpose, for the rehabilitation of children who have received a cochlear implant. Okay, then we could do all this research, which is also focusing on children, how important is early implantation. We will hear then later on a plenary talk from André Grahl, who will show from this work how important it is and what we basically have got out of this research. And then, of course, you heard about this cluster of excellence, which gives us a very solid financial base for the research. We have it now in the third phase. Each phase is 7 years, and for each phase we had about 50 million euros just to put into research. And you see here that we basically have used it also not only to push forward the clinical work, but also the basic research and also on the devices. And so this is our channel. And I want to finish here with this slide that shows Professor Lehnhardt and myself at a later time when we basically discuss what has been achieved and how to push it forward. I think I would like to leave it with this and hand over.
Thomas, you as the successor to my late husband, Ernst Lehnhardt, who undoubtedly contributed significantly to the success of the multi-channel cochlear implant from down under, from Australia in Europe. You shared his vision, you continued his work's life over the last 30 years, and you created the most important and globally recognized Center for Cochlear Implants in Hanover, and this for the world. Thank you so much for offering us the opportunity to have this round table. Thank you for the opportunity to saying good morning, Sue, bonjour, Bernard, buenos dias, Lali, Angel, and Manuel, and Dobry den, Michał from Prague. The desire to enable, to hear, and to help people open the world into the hearing is as old as humanity. We can read about it already in the Bible. However, until the middle of the last century, deafness was an irrevocable blow of fate. Early experiments like Volta, and as you see here, Giorno and Aries in 1957 in France, and a little bit later, 1963, the surprisingly exact description how a multi-channel cochlear implant should look like from Zöllner in Freiburg and Keidel in Frankfurt. The time was ripe, and well-known researchers worked hard to develop an implant and restore hearing. William House was mentioned here many times already, and his engineer in the US in the 60s. And Henri Jouard, 1977 in Paris, Bernard Fraisse in France, in Toulouse in 79, Marquet in Belgium, and let us not forget also Hruby and Tichy in Prague, Fraser in London, Dillier and Spielmann in Zurich in 1984, and of course Burian Hochmeyers in Vienna. And finally, as you see here, we're talking today about this implant developed by Professor Graham Clark since 1967 in Melbourne. Many of these early concepts, like the single channel and the percutaneous, have not survived. Their results were not convincing and strengthened many scientists in their skepticism, and of course also the Deaf Society in its categorical rejection. But the multi-channel transcutaneous cochlear implant also had to overcome some serious obstacles. Jim Patrick, one of the really early pioneers, the researchers, unfortunately, he cannot join us today, but I had a chance to have an interview with him, and so please let us listen to him how it all happened in Australia. So we will have a round table during the conference ESPCI in Hanover very soon. Unfortunately, you cannot be with us, but you kindly agreed to send us this video message. So Jim, you were and you still are very close to Professor Graham Clark, the inventor of the world-leading cochlear implant, the multi-channel cochlear implant. Would you kindly tell us how you succeeded to convince the Australian government to support the commercial development of this device? Before, I think it's true, you collected money in the streets of Melbourne?
You're absolutely right, Monika. Well, Graham Clark first became interested in treating hearing loss when he was very young. He noticed that his father, who is a pharmacist, had trouble understanding the orders from his customers. He recalls that from then, he wanted to fix ears. He qualified as an ENT surgeon and then completed his PhD, in which he found that deafened animals would respond to electrical stimulation of the auditory nerve. At this time, the research community believed that providing useful hearing with electrical stimulation was an impossible dream because the auditory system was just too complex. But Graham was not put off, and following his PhD, he established the ENT department at the University of Melbourne and set up a research team. As the normal sources of research funding rejected his applications, all the funds came from public donations, including a collection that you just mentioned, outside a major department store at Christmas. Here is a cartoon of Graham collecting. The research demonstrated that electrical stimulation of the auditory nerve was safe, that animals responded to changes in rate and stimulation and the region of the cochlea that was being stimulated. And this established the need for multiple electrode stimulation. I joined Graham's team in 1975. With my background in electrical engineering, I led the development of our human research device using the latest available technology. And here you see a final assembly. We were fortunate to receive advice about how to seal the electronics for human implantation from Nucleus Limited, a company in Sydney that made heart pacemakers that they sold around the world. A research volunteer, our first one, had been profoundly deafened in a car accident. He was very frustrated because after 6 months, he still could not understand anything his family members said using lip reading. He was implanted then with our research stimulator, and stimulating testing led to the development of our first coding strategy, generating sound sensations that were complementary to what could be seen on the face of the speaker. And with practice, our volunteer could understand speech. Well, we were in the right place at the right time, as the Australian government had just started supporting projects that were considered in the public interest, and we received funds that paid for some more research subjects, a market survey and a development cost plan. It then paid for the commercial development of the first cochlear implant by a small team of which I was a member in Nucleus, and a preclinical trial beginning in 1982 in Australia. And Nucleus was very experienced in both medical device manufacture and the design and conduct of clinical trials. This is very important to the success of our project. Following success with the trial in Australia, we then ran a clinical trial in the US. There was a lot of interest from key opinion leaders in some major institutions, and we received regulatory approval in 1985. Then we went to Europe, where there were many skeptics, for another clinical trial. We had wonderful support from Dr. Ernst Lehnhardt, leading to regulatory approval. And this is how we began.
Thank you very much, Jim, for sharing this history of the multi-channel cochlear implant in Australia and how it came to the US and to Europe. So we will have a round table. When I said initially that there was a lot of research going on, well-known people involved in parallel, I did not mention that also Ernst Lehnhardt was involved. He also tried to develop a cochlear implant following the description of Zöllner and Keidel. He established a cooperation with the Technical High School here in Hanover with Professor Mussmann and with Professor Meyer from the Max Planck Institute in Göttingen. But then one day, early 1984, Dr. Mike Hirschholm came. You can see him here on the slide together with Ernst. And he presented him this multi-channel cochlear implant developed by Professor Clark in Australia. And Ernst was immediately very impressed. And soon after this visit, he, together with engineer Rolf Badmer, they were already on a plane to Australia. And they met with Professor Clark, with Dr. Mike Hirschhorn, with Jim Patrick and David Money. Very short after that, already back in Hanover, he implanted his first 4 adult patients in 1984. And 4 years later, because he wanted to wait and see how the results were, based on satisfactory results, he decided to implant children. And in fact, the first child was an only 1.5-year-old girl, which was very courageous at that time to decide to have an implant. And the other one was the first European child, and this is Tobias Fischer, who is with us today and who presented yesterday during the opening ceremony. And I would like to add here that Tobias Fischer still uses his first implant. It's still functioning, and this is now 37 years. So no wonder that Ernst was really convinced this is a fantastic implant. We want to go ahead. And he was not satisfied with only Germany. So he wanted to carry the message to other countries. And one of these countries was France. And so I'm very happy to have Bernard here, Bernard Fraisse from Toulouse, and he will share his memories, how it all happened in France.
Transcription, and that is so. Thank you very much, Thomas, for this invitation. It's a privilege and honor, and thank you, Monika, for setting this session. It's important to remember our mentor, and it's important to remember the history. So Winston Churchill said, the farther back you can look, the farther forward you are likely to see. It's true that the history of, no, it's not my slide. Yes, let's go back. The history starts in France. Ariès was an otologist, and a patient with a total hearing loss and an open cavity come to him, and this patient tell him that with an electrical wire, he was getting some electrical sensation. And in 2 months, they built an implant with Juni as a physiologist from a device for motor nerve. And they implant this patient, they publish it in 1977, And by an extraordinary coincidence, this article, a part of the article, was published in the Los Angeles Times, in the health page of the Los Angeles Times. And William Mouse was the father for us, at least for me, on autoneurosurgery, decided with his genius engineer, Jack Urban, to develop this first implant. And we have here the video of the first patient implanted in '61 by William Mouse, and they have 5 electrodes transcutaneous. And this patient is a famous Mr. Gasek. And they was looking on the oscilloscope what was the stimulation and the pitch sensation. That was the first patient done by William Mouse, and the first fitting, thanks to Cochlear, to send me this, and the House Institute, the situation. And then they published at the first conference on cochlear implant on stimulation of the cochlear nerve, the result of Mr. Gasek, and rewriting the conclusion of this Congress. Harold Shugnesh, for them, was a famous professor in Harvard, say, I will admit that we need a new operation in otology, but I am afraid that is not it. And Nelson Young, the physiologist of MIT, there is no physiological basis for cochlear implants. So be aware, and in disruptive innovation is sometimes very difficult. I have the privilege to be the fellow of William Mouse for 2 years, in '77 and '79. And it was the right place to be, at the right time, because, as you were mentioned by Monika, all around the world at this time, there was a development of multi-channel. Claude-Henri Chouard, Kurt Burian and Ingeborg Mayer, and Graham Clark. So it was the right place to be at the right time. And when we look at our pioneer, they have an extraordinary talent, but they have also an extraordinary perseverance. Because to continue with all the doubt and the difficulty, and we are here, and we should thank her very much. When I come back from US, I was fellow in neurosurgery in a neurosurgical clinic, and I developed my own implant from Medtronic Corporation. It was at the early '80s, and because the receiver was too big, the receiver was under the skin of the thoracic area, and I put a single channel electrode in the round window. And we did with Yves Lazard, the neurosurgeon, our first publication in '83 on patients with single-side deafness and tinnitus in the French journal. The name was Implantation chronique d'électrode au niveau de la fenêtre ronde. And that was our first publication in '83. And I guess it's extremely important to reward and express our gratitude to our mentor. They inspire me, they give me light, they improve my career anyway. And I have the privilege to receive him in 1992 at the first Cochlear Implant Congress. And you can see on the photography in Toulouse, William Mouse, Ernst Lenarz, Michel Portman, and Juan Manuel Tato. I would like to conclude by 2 points very important in the near future. One, we have a technique which is the safest neuroprosthesis and efficient. And it's abnormal to have only 10% of the population in adults who accept. And this access should be changed. So we should change our way, our car pathway, to improve the accessibility of cochlear implants around the world. That's one. The second problem is in Europe, developing new innovation, disruptive innovation, is becoming more and more complex. So what we have to do is like the cardiac surgeon. We should have a meeting of all stakeholders, patients, scientists, agencies, to get interim funding in Europe for innovation and disruptive innovation. So I would like to thank you, and just to conclude, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernard, also for sharing this vision by Peter Drucker. Now, from France, we move to the UK, and I think there is one person who was absolutely instrumental in the very early days of cochlear implant in the UK, and this is Sue Archibald. I would say you were the driving force and the soul of Jerry O'Donoghue's team in Nottingham. At the same time, Richard Ramsden in Manchester pioneered the multi-channel cochlear implant as well as the auditory brainstem implant. But Sue, would you kindly share with us how this all happened in the UK?
Thank you, Monica. I'm not at all sure that Jerry O'Donoghue needed a driving force, but I certainly was there at the beginning of his program. So, first meetings in Nottingham. There you are, Monica, at the first operations with Ernst Lehnhardt and a young Jerry O'Donoghue, and that was the first time we met up. So, sorry. While I'm having a look at that, I very carefully changed those slides so that they fitted yesterday. So I will have to speak to them. As a teacher of the deaf, it seemed that while I was teaching deaf children, surgeons and scientists were really working away to change the way that deaf education was going. I was the teacher of the deaf, the first child in the country to have a cochlear implant. That's Damien on the left. He had the first single channel with Graham Fraser at UCL in London. So the single channel device was actually, of course, very challenging. But then along came Michael Batt and his mother. And I would suggest that actually we're talking about pioneers. The pioneers actually are the parents, I think, who entrusted their children to your care at this time. So Marion and Jerry O'Donoghue and others in Nottingham came along to set up Nottingham Implant Programme. And that's when we started. There we go, bionic ear, that terrible term, breaks Michael's silence. And then Damien came back to the hospital, and after he had his multi-channel implant, he said, "That's like I can really hear Mrs. Archbold." I don't know quite how I happened to have a fax from Cochlear that gives all the children in Europe as at 0389, but if you have a look down there at the bottom, Mr. O'Donoghue, Michael Batt, and if you have a look on the left-hand side, Tobias, you'll actually see, Tobias, your name on this fax in Hanover in the same year as we started in Nottingham. So suddenly, I was working in a hospital. I'd been working as a teacher in schools with small children, not in a school. I was coordinating a growing cochlear implant team. It was into a new world for me, but actually, looking back, years of working with classes of 45-year-olds was probably quite a good experience and a good training to manage a cochlear implant program, because it was a time of great controversy. Our walls were daubed with slogans about cochlear implantation. It sometimes felt quite dangerous to come into work at strange times. We had to have security guards on when we had workshops because of the protests about cochlear implantation. But there was great excitement. After years of teaching profoundly deaf children who were really unable to hear, even with the best hearing aids we had then, I had never heard a deaf child babble before. The first time we started implanting 2-year-olds, the first child we implanted was 2 because we had great skills in analyzing early communication skills. I'd never heard a deaf child babble. I'd never been able to share a book with a deaf child. You can't look at a book and look at a deaf child. You can't share a book. And I suddenly realized the implications of this for developing language and literacy. So we planned already for a long-term future with a comprehensive database. And you asked what do you think was one of the most important things we did, Monika. And one of those was to establish the British Cochlear Implant Group, which thrives today. Thankfully, there were others that realized the broader impact beyond the clinical testing to language and literacy and education. They drove a bus from Prague to our first conference in 1992. Who was that? That was the Super Czechs from Prague. They had no money, so they got on a bus and drove it all the way to Nottingham. And there was Paul van den Broek, who asked me to talk about your dream. I have a dream. I actually talked about I have a nightmare, which was that we'd be implanting these young children and seeing these amazing changes and not thinking about the future. And thanks to Monika and Ernst, thinking more broadly, thinking about these parents and the families and the implications, they saw the need for user groups and parent groups. And EuroCI Users was established in the home of the Velters in Luxembourg. And there is Bodo Bertram there at the table with his usual cigarette. And of course, EuroCI Users is thriving today as a parent group, making great impact at a European level, advocacy level, and continuing to thrive under the presidency of Tobias. Other people understood the broader implications. Goran Bredberg and Diane, we have in Pamplona, they were the first people to start educational courses for teachers to recognize that teachers in the classroom had to be able to address these issues. And Owen Officiers in Antwerp, with Bodo Bertram again, there are parents on that round table, teachers of the deaf on that round table, educational courses for teachers in Pamplona. So this exciting, revolutionary management of deafness had broader implications than perhaps the surgeons at first had thought about. So thank you for letting me share those, and thank you for all that you're doing, Monika.
So thank you very much, Sue, for this, sharing your memories. And as far as I remember, and I hope I remember correctly, there was no Spanish development or concept at that time. So I would like to ask Angel, what was your main motivation to work so hard and ensure that cochlear implantation was introduced as a scientifically proven method in Spain?
Well, thank you, Monika, for your kind presentation. Let me check. Is this way? Okay, this way. So first of all, I would like to thank you, Monika and Thomas, for organizing this session. It's absolutely incredible, terrific, really. So in Spain, in 1985, one very well-known otologist, which was Emilio García Ibáñez, made the first cochlear implant. But as far as I remember, there were only two important centers that realized that there is a need of a cochlear implant team or program. Of course, the first one was in Manuel's in Navarra. And the second one was in Salamanca. It was a small city just in the west part of Spain. And at that time, I was a young member of the staff there working in the department. So how we could receive the information to learn about cochlear implant at that time? We're talking about late 80s, beginnings of 90s. So if you see in this slide, this is, at that time we had a lack of standards, of course, nothing of scientific medicine, very few personal-based learning, and we have to move to some scientific advancement So we have to move to technology improvements, public health, relationship, and that was something that you only saw at that time in Navarra and some part somehow in Salamanca. So how we learn about cochlear implants. So for all of you who are very young, remember that in 1988, Reagan was the president of the United States. Thatcher was the prime minister in UK. The best important film was Rain Man, and Faith was the most important song. And one important thing, remember that Google started in 1996. That was the computer that was the most important for the most rich people. And on the other side was the computer we used to use. And that, as you can see there is the slides for the meeting, was something terrible. If you lose some of these, you can never recover. So remember, this is the way we have at that time. So in my personal situation, from 88, I was in Salamanca, we worked with monocanal devices at that period. And I have the possibility to visit to Chuar. I was with him. He has a strong character. I agree with you, Bernard. It's very, very strong character, and it's a very well-educated way to say. So it was my first column of learning about cochlear implants at that time. Then I moved to the Las Palmas University at 90 and 91. I realized that we have to move to multi-channel implants, and there were two persons that were for me absolutely important. Was Professor Lehnhardt and Professor Clark. I have the opportunity to visit Lehnhardt, and Lehnhardt was in my island working with some surgeries with us, and I had the opportunity to visit and stay in Melbourne for a period with Clark. So at that time, 91, 92, is when I based all of this information. But you see that the information was received by people you were visiting. So at 95, I decided that I have a strong, or let's say what I thought at that time, strong concern of cochlear implants. So where to go in 95 when I have the possibility to discuss with somebody, at that time difficult to discuss something. So I decided to ask permission to Professor Bruce Gans to visit him in 1995. For me, that changed the way of seeing cochlear implants. Bruce Gans is there. I have to thank you for all the things I learned from you, not only in 95, but also for the rest of my life. So this is important, but how we learn that? We have Bibles, not books, Bibles. What was written there, nobody can discuss. It doesn't matter what they say, that's the absolutely truth. And there was one very small book that everybody at that time used. Was this one, you can see there, Multi-Channel Surgeon Manual. We memorized all the techniques made by these people there. You can see Professor Lehnhardt, Ramsden. You can see the first one there, who I think the picture was taken after summer in the beach, Professor Fraze. And you can see down, the one with a lot of hair is Manrique. So we learn from that books, and we use that books. I remember to go to the surgical operating room with these books to learn. And this was very, very important. So at that time, we don't have all of the possibilities you have today. So now we are all very lucky to have all this possibility. And you have to visit people. And here you can find people I have been visiting in my life from I learned. So I recommend all young people to move, to see what others are doing. This is very rich for your learning process. And at that time, that's the only way we have, except in Congress, in which we share information to visit. So I have to thank, you can see here, Jim Patrick. It was extraordinary with lessons. Of course, the organizer of this meeting, Professor Lenarz, Richard Ramsden, of course, Emilio García-Ibáñez, who was a master for otology, Jerry O'Donoghue, why not? And of course, I learned a lot of my brother in life, which is Manuel Manrique. So this is the only the only thing I want to remember of that time, that we have to move. We have to see people. This morning, I was also mentioned by Thomas, the human contact is essential. And the human contact is extraordinary. And all of these people, you can say, well, they are difficult to access. They are not difficult to access. The most difficult people to access was Bruce Gans at that time. And when I went to Iowa, the first night I was having dinner in his house. I phoned my wife. I said, I was having dinner in the house of Bruce Gans. And my wife said, what are you doing in Iowa? You have to go to learn Cochlea implants, not to have dinner with Bruce Gans in this house. But so this was extraordinary, and this was the way we learned at the beginning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angel. And you just showed the slide of the focus group. And in fact, this was my idea. I thought in the very early times we have to get the key opinion leaders in the UK, at that time Richard Ramsden, in France, and this was Bernard Fraisse, in Spain Manuel Manrique, and of course my late husband. And the purpose of this focus group was to change the world nearly, because they exchanged their experience, they shared their knowledge, it was a real teamwork, and also, most importantly, they gave recommendations to the manufacturer how to improve the device. And Manuel, you were one of the members, and I think you want to share with us today the idea of the endothelial electrode array.
Thank you, Monika. Thank you, Thomas. It's a great honor to be here. Just to speak about somebody that changed the life of many patients, but also changed our life. So, surgery, and so we are now in a situation that I would like to announce from Professor Lehnhardt. This was very important during the first cochlear implantations to get this technology, children, patients, adults, etc., but also introduce a new concept. So we call disruptive advance. So it's the subsurgery concept. Of course, that this concept has an important evolution through the years, but he introduced these concepts in the field of the cochlear implants. But I would like to share, maybe most of you don't know this experience, looking for other alternatives for hearing preservation to the intracochlear intraluminal electrodes. That was the use of endosteal electrodes. It's a very interesting experience. I was involved with Professor Lehnhardt in this topic, and the initial idea of that was introduce this electroacoustic stimulation using these devices for people who have hearing preservation in low frequencies. So the idea was create an insertion, not in the intraluminal insertion, not in the scala tympani, scala vestibuli, in other area of the cochlea that is the endosteal area. This is one histological slide, and the idea is just to place an electrode array, a flat electrode array in this endosteal layer. So we demonstrate that we are able to stimulate from that point the auditory system, and also we create a tool we call micromanipulator to drill the lateral wall of the cochlea to expose the spiral ligament and to create this groove that allows to place an endosteal electrode. This was how works this micromanipulator. With it, we have a very, very good exposition of the spiral ligament without produce any damage at that level. So This was a tool that was supported also by Cochlear Company. After that, we introduced this flat electrode array in the lateral wall of the cochlea at the level of the spiral ligament. Well, maybe at the present time, we had not any commercial device based in this idea, but it's true that we learned that this kind of technology has a theoretical advantage. For example, the maintenance of the interlabyrinthine spaces and physiology, the preservation of the round window membrane. This surgery is compatible with preservation of residual hearing and does not impede for simultaneous or future treatments like hearing aids, conventional cochlear implants, active middle ear implants, third therapy, medication, and etc. So maybe this idea that came from Professor Lehnhardt and I share with you can be interesting for potential indications like selective stimulation of high-frequency bands, caught at the level of the basal term, can be interesting for the treatment of tinnitus at that levels, and maybe this technology can be to deliver some treatment, some medicine at the level of the spiral ligament in the cochlea. So thanks, Professor Lehnhardt. I really enjoy doing something together, especially in this field and in other areas of the cochlear implants.
Thank you so much, Manuel. Don't leave yet, because this was very, very interesting, a concept. I think it was not continued. No. But Manuel was also instrumental in bringing the multi-channel cochlear implant from Spain to South America. So maybe you want to tell us, how did you do this?
Well, at the beginning of the clinical application of cochlear implants, coexist the single-channel cochlear implant and multi-channel cochlear implant at that time, and also from a geographical point of view, so was areas like Latin America that has a poor penetration of cochlear implants. So this scenario changed. Actually, we have, in Latin America, most of the countries are using the cochlear implant. The penetration is very, very high, and all of them are using a multi-channel cochlear implant. So I think that is, at the end, an example of that happening in medicine, how the knowledge are able to move from one area to other areas, how it's possible to break barriers. No importance about questions of race, about language, and etc. So from Professor Lehnhardt, we learn and we try to continue this dissemination of knowledge in Latin America. I am not only the main actor of this. There are many people that cooperate in this work, but I think that we'll feel proud to be part of this change of transmission of knowledge in the field of the cochlear implants. Thanks, Professor.
Thank you, Manuel. With a little bit of delay, we came to Prague, to Czechia, and this was due to political reasons, of course, at that time. So 1991, we came to Prague, and it was, in fact, Zdeněk Kabelka who did the first surgeries for children, and unfortunately, he passed away some years ago. And here is Michał. Would you please share your memories? Would you come up here?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to be here. First of all, I would like to send many greetings from Jiří Skřivan. He unfortunately cannot be here, and he asked me to say a few words about beginnings of cochlear implants in Czech Republic, in adults and in children, of course. The first cochlear implant in Czech Republic was performed early in January 1987. It was an adult patient, but this situation has relation to childhood also, because the clinical engineer who developed the first Czech-made cochlear implant, he had a deaf daughter due to meningitis, and he decided, I will do cochlear implant for her. But it takes a couple of years, I think 2 or 3 years, and unfortunately he didn't get it because of ossification of cochlea. But first 10 adult patients were implanted. But before so-called Velvet Revolution, it means before 1989, the situation was really difficult in Czech Republic. We cannot get any technologies from Western Europe. The situation completely changed after the revolution. Everything was new. The things started to be changed. And now we can everything. And we can everything. Jarka Přírodová, she was daughter of Professor Feistaver. He was head of ENT department at Model Hospital in Prague at that time. She brought in Prague first multi-channel electrode, Nucleus 22 from Australia. And first Czech children was implanted here in Hanover in 1992 by Professor Lehnhardt. And then 1 year later started the program already in Czech Republic. And the first Czech implanted child was in 1993, and the first year we implanted 1 patient, second year 4 patients, and it grew and grew. Professor Lehnhardt was mentor of Zdeněka Belka, a successor of Professor Feistaver. Then nowadays we implant about 60 pediatric patients per year. We followed the principles of soft surgery, of course, and we have very nice memories to that times, and we don't forget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michał. And I would like now to emphasize the fact that Ernst Lenhardt was not only a brilliant surgeon, he had a deep understanding of audiology. He understood that cochlear implantation was a multidisciplinary issue, a program, and most importantly, he said the excellent quality of the implant and professional surgery is probably 10% of the potential success. The rest, and this is 90%, is rehabilitation, care after the implantation, and the role of parents. Now, Sue, you are instrumental, and over the last, I think it's now 35 years, you preach the message that the role of the parents is crucial.
Absolutely. Thank you. And he always understood. I'm sorry. Thank you. And Professor Lehnhardt always understood that the parents and the educators were so important. We're back to Prague here, and he took me out to lunch in the 1990s in Prague, where they were doing amazing work, and said, tell me, why do you make the point that the children spend less than 1% of their time in the clinic? How do you calculate this? So I did point out that actually the children spend the vast majority of their time at home and at school and with other people. And that is where we need to affect the change. So I said, well, what surgeons start, teachers have to finish. And actually, I don't think teachers have actually caught up. For parents, education remains a major challenge, and for young people with cochlear implants. Parents say, my son had an implant at a brilliant centre, sent to a school with little knowledge. We've been fighting for education. If you talk to parents, that's the word that comes up again and again. We have to fight for the education. Gears and Moog in 1991, they said teachers are responsible for the long-term management of children with implants. They don't spend their time in the clinics, but at home and at school. And I really would like to thank the surgeons on ESPCI who've always included me in all their discussions and actually listened and taken on board that this is what we really need to address to have success in their incredible endeavours. Because looking back in the 1980s, that's not me, but it could have been me. So there are the children with their headphones on. That's what deaf education looked back in the 1980s. The most useful thing about having the headphones on was actually the kids couldn't move very far from their desks. They were sort of chained to their desks. But goodness knows what they were hearing in those days. But it's been transformed from that to this, where children actually can participate in education, can actually hear what is saying in the classroom, are actually developing higher levels of language and literacy than ever before. And it amuses some of us who are in the room when people say how much time and how much rehabilitation children with cochlear implants take. Let me tell you, they needed a great deal of input before the advent of cochlear implantation to achieve much lower levels of language and literacy. So one of Jerry O'Donoghue's famous sayings is, the most important thing you do in life is choose your parents. And if we look around the world, it's parents, and I'm sorry, gentlemen, usually mothers who've driven things forward. And we have on the right those three mothers who drove things forward in the UK, the true pioneers without which this wouldn't have happened. And on the left, you'll see there's Jerry. We did a conference called Quality of Life in Childhood, because we all recognize that we are about the quality of life in childhood, not just hearing in the clinic. And you'll see Rebecca there, one of our first children implanted at 3. And guess what? Her young son has just been implanted at 7 months. And the difference in this way in which he is learning and acquiring spoken language is amazing. So on and on and on we go and keep learning. And we need to make sure that we have these lifelong sustainable services to make sure that all the work that Ernst Lenhardt started in Europe actually continues and is sustainable for the future of all the children that are implanted. And that's a responsibility to us all to make sure that happens. Thank you very much, Monika.
Thank you very much, Sue. And we have another very committed lady here, Lali Juan Pastor from Spain, and she contributed to the acceptance that rehabilitation is of key importance. And please tell us your contribution, not only in Spain, but in the whole of Europe.
Thank you, Monika. Okay, so let me go back. Around 30 years ago, it was 1996 in Mallorca, where I'm from. This year we have held a national ENT conference, and I had one of my first oral communications. The topic was the psychological preparation of children for the CI surgery. Because at that time, kids had 3 years, 4 years, or even more when they received the implant. But a couple of weeks after, I went to Heidelberg to meet Monika and Professor Lehnhardt for a rehab project, and I mentioned about the topic and my concerns. And he really laughed about, kindly, but laughing, about my concern. Because he said, but look, Lali, definitely children won't even remember about the surgery. But he said also something very important to me, that was, why not to dedicate your energy to prepare parents to provide a very rich environment, rich sound environment and rich communication environment, to talk more and to talk better with the child. And I still believe that this preparation for the family starts far before the implant, when we have to help them to prepare to be talkative and communicative, and to provide this rich environment for the kids. Also, Professor Lehnhardt told us that when the magic happens is when we learn to work together. So surgeons, audiologists, therapists, social workers, teachers of the deaf, many professionals, together with the family and the child. This is when this magic happens. And also, I know that this roundtable, it's about the legacy of Professor Lehnhardt, but I want to say some words about Monika, because I think really Monika was really the continuation of Professor Lehnhardt's legacy. And she is doing this with a lot of energy and passion. And I think spreading to the world this holistic view of the concept of Professor Lehnhardt. So I've been really lucky to be part of some of these projects. For example, the QESIC and the HISEN. The QESIC was together with the rehab team of Professor Manrique in Navarra. With the HISEN also, we were teaching professionals, teachers in all around Europe to support them, because at the beginning it was not so easy to have resources and to support these teachers in the school, in regular schools. Now we have different projects like the GIS to support parents and professionals in Kyrgyzstan, and we also run the PORA sessions. Just for to understand the energy of Monika, because I'm sure that all of you will agree that she's absolutely tireless. These PORA meetings happens on Sunday afternoon, and she really keeps to get us together. Just a few weeks ago, we've been together with Emma Rushbrooks from Australia. It was the middle of the night for her, but we had a very, very productive discussion. So today, the situation is different, probably, I don't know, but from my perspective, it's a little bit more complicated, maybe, or complex, not complicated, a little bit more complex, and a little bit different. But I think the core ideas of professional Lenarz still remain. So working in a team, ethical commitment, all these values are still valid. And as my final thought, I would like to say that what we have to take with us is definitely the science that we have heard, but a little bit more than this, that is the heart. It's the insight, it's the person. And this final thought, that probably, for me, the most important, that is, we must not only pass on what we know, but also the courage to question it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lali, for your very kind words. We had a look back, and I think we want to spend a couple of minutes on having a look where we are now. And I hold the view that over the last 30 years, from a technological point of view, not really very much has happened. I think it is a kind of stagnation. And also, next slide please, I think it's a pity that only 5% of the potential of cochlear implant candidates receive it. And I think this was mentioned today, we have to make these cochlear implants accessible also in countries of low income. Now, I want to have a look into the future. Yeah, telepractice is another thing which could be used very, very beneficially for the patients. But unfortunately, despite of Corona, it's not spread in a way yet that I would like to see it. And to have a look into the future, I asked Jim Patrick again, what does he think, what could we expect from the future? Thank you very much, Jim, for sharing this history of the multi-channel implant in cochlear implant in Australia and how it came to the US and to Europe. I think we also will discuss the technical developments which have taken place over the decades, and we want to discuss which we expect for the foreseeable future. In my opinion, no disruptive change has happened so far. Smaller, thinner, easier to handle, more aesthetically acceptable, all very good. But, for example, the totally implantable cochlear implant that David Money announced for the year 2000 has not yet become reality. Jim, do you share my view?
Yes. The research tiki that you mentioned, the total cochlear implant, is still not a clinical reality. For the research subject, everything went well, except that the body noise from the implanted microphone was a great limit to performance, and so there was a much better outcome using the optional external speech processor and microphone. So a different form of implantable microphone concept is needed, and options such as a sensor in the middle ear are still being explored. Robotic surgery is being explored at several places around the world, and that's steadily evolving. It's particularly useful in places with less experienced surgeons. Also, there's gene therapy, and that's making a difference. There's currently a research study in Sydney in which gene therapy is used to produce intracochlear BDNF, and that's used to cause neurite growth towards the electrodes. This improves stimulus localization and hearing performance. This research is continuing. Another use of gene manipulation is an attempt to reconstruct the elements of the cochlea, but I'm not familiar with progress there. Advances in technology and AI have also, or they've had and they will continue to have, a profound impact. We already have wireless links for audio connections and remote clinical management, with increased benefit for both patients and clinicians. So I expect that advances in AI will also help the fitting of infants following infant hearing loss detection in newborn screening programs. I think we can expect a lot to change.
Thank you very much, Jim. This was a very clear vision, and I am so pleased to hear that it seems, it doesn't only seem to be, but Australia is again leading in the field of research and development in cochlear implants to the benefit of people with a severe hearing loss, and especially, as you say, Jim, for the very young children, as we have newborn hearing screening, and so these children can receive the cochlear implant at a very early stage. Jim, I wish you
Monica.
The best, all the best to you, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your memories with us. Bye-bye, Jim. Whatever the future may bring in terms of technological progress, we hope that Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who died here in Hanover in 1716, he had a guiding principle, and this is truly medical action also requires the ability to recognize and decide based on the best interest of the individual patient. Or, to quote John Naisbitt, the successful author of the book Megatrends, the most exciting breakthroughs in the 21st century will not occur because of technology, but because of an expanding concept of what it means to be human. With this in mind, I wish you a successful Congress May you get a lot of interesting information, gain insights, above all, but be able to maintain and establish valuable human contacts. Thank you very much, the audience, and thank you very much, the speakers.